Hey, it's NPR's Book of the Day. I'm Andrew Limbong. Written about correctly, the work of putting together a home, the cooking, the cleaning, the administrative stuff, can be romantic. It's hard work, but it's beautiful work. And today, we've got two books honoring that work. In a bit, we'll hear from writer Crystal Wilkinson, who dug back into her deep family history to write a cookbook that doubles as a memoir and describes the kitchen as a place of both toil and joy. But first, Helen Rebanks lives on a farm, and she has to do all the stuff that goes along with that. And her book, The Farmer's Wife, does contain recipes, but it's more of an ode to the work that goes into getting food on the table. And she tells NPR's Scott Simon that being on the farm has made her acutely aware of how much food should cost. We get that and a surprise guest appearance from one of their part-time farmhands after the break.
This message comes from Apple Card. Earn up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase, every day. Then grow it at 4.50% annual percentage yield when you open a savings account with Apple Card. Visit apple.co/card calculator to see how much you can earn. Apple Card is subject to credit approval. Savings available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings accounts provided by Goldman Sachs Bank USA. Member FDIC. Terms apply.
Helen Rebanks' memoir, The Farmer's Wife, begins with a young rooster's crow at 5:30 in the morning. Then follows Helen's day as she cooks, cleans, and cares for a family of 6 and 6 sheepdogs, 2 ponies, 25 chickens, 50 head of cattle, and 500 sheep. What follows is no less than life in full: births, family, mortality, zoning laws, paperwork, and recipes for food and for life. Along with her husband, James, who is also an author, Helen Rebanks runs the family farm in the English Lake District. She is the author now of The Farmer's Wife and joins us now from her family farm. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me onto the show.
And also joining us is Nick Offerman, the actor and comedian, who is also a part-time shepherd and farmhand with the Rebanks. We'll get to that. Nick, thank you for being back with us.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Helen Rebanks, how much of any given day do you feel tired?
Tired is yes, it's a regular occurrence. Sometimes it's a competitive tiredness in our family.
Do you feel women on the farm are often overlooked and the work they do?
I think I'm finding that women that are doing roles that men have traditionally done are getting lots of media attention now, particularly in the UK. And that's all well and good. But what about the women that do the behind the scenes work that keeps these farms going?
I'd like to ask you to read a section if you could. It's a section your husband James suggests you drive up to the barn to see if a cow named Heidi has given birth.
Heidi turns around to see what has just appeared out of her. She starts to lick the birth sac away from around the new calf's face and body and moves gently around it. We drive a little closer. The whole herd has noticed the new arrival. They're up and making their way over to see. Dinky moos and calls to her own calf, and she gallops over to her. Cara and Eyebright are the most curious and maternal. They're due to calve soon. Heidi stands over her newborn, a proud mother, and all the aunties fuss around it as it tries to get to its feet. Wow, that's fast, I say, and James looks under its back end as closely as he dares. It looks like a bull calf from there. I can feel the relief in his body, relief that he hasn't needed to intervene. He's smiling. I put my arms around his waist and squeeze. Brilliant, I say, and he leans back to give me a kiss. He starts the engine and we head back to the house. There are lots of tough days on the farm when everything goes against you. But on a morning like this, there is nowhere else on earth I'd rather be.
That is such a beautiful section.
Oh, thank you.
Let's get to Nick Offerman, who's been standing by.
With tears in his eyes and a smile on his face.
How did you enter this world of the Rebanks family farm?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, in brief, through my love of the writing of Wendell Berry and other agrarian writers, impossibly led me to discovering Helen's husband, James, on Twitter, of all places. And we became friends, and I ended up going to visit them while I was shooting a TV show in Manchester.
And you do actually work there, don't you? Now and then.
Yeah, I mean, yes, as that's my Disneyland. They make fun of me because instead of roller coasters, I like to help sort out the sheep in the rain, and for some reason, that's a good time to me.
Mm. Helen, were you, God bless, were you ever tempted to tell Nick Offerman, hey, Mr. Hollywood, this is no place for amateurs?
Oh, no, not at all. Nick arrived a few years ago with a thick beard and a bald head, and he did look slightly unusual. But when we were all round the kitchen table and we shared food together, it just all fell into place. And he has a few cows here he owns and just thoroughly enjoys company.
Many recipes in this book. Cooking's important to you, isn't it?
Oh, it certainly is. And I think that's how the book started. I wanted to tell stories around the food. Having meals around the family table is really important to me. We seem to have forgotten that real food comes from healthy soil.
I was struck by the fact that you said living on a farm has made you suspicious of cheap food. How so?
If it's too cheap, then we're paying the price elsewhere. Because when we see how we grow food and the investment that it takes, if that isn't paid for properly, we're putting money into industrial food, aren't we?
Nick Offerman, what do you absorb in your own life and learn from your time on the Rebanks farm?
Digging in literally to their way of life is better than any spa I've ever been to, because it involves all of the things you would think of as being restorative and healing. And then for Helen to then turn around and put out this book, which I just was so powerfully moved by, because she gets into the simplicity of what life is all about. And specifically regarding, the people who produce our food, the people who take care of all of the systems by which our good food is delivered. I found that this is one of my favorite subject matters. If I had better manners, you could call me a gentleman farmer, and I love to go participate in the whole thing. When I'm spending time and communing with the Rebanks, then that makes me aware. It redoubles my attention in the rest of my life. Where's this food coming from? No matter where I am in the world, who made this? And do they care about us and our health, or do they care more about their profits?
Helen Rebanks, I don't believe I have ever asked this question of a philosopher or a poet, but I'm going to try it on you. You see a lot of life on the farm. What's life all about?
Life is about love. The whole book for me, creating this, has been about love, and we want our loved ones around us. We do little simple things every day for each other. And the book very much is about all of those little things.
And Nick, although you've touched on this a bit, what do you think you've learned on that avenue of life by being with the Rebanks?
When we do the good work right, that is us expressing our affection for one another and for Mother Nature's creation. When I read Helen's book, I was just astonished at her clarity of vision. She took what is pure and simple about her life and wrote it almost like a beautiful novel. Yes, it's full of recipes, but the recipes are so poignantly placed that she'll tell an anecdote about maybe a childbirth of her own, and then she'll hit you with a shortbread recipe. It's like a punch in the gut. Yeah.
It should come with a slight warning that it might require tissues.
Well, Helen Rebanks' new memoir, The Farmer's Wife. She was joined by her farmhand, Nick Offerman. I want to thank you both very much for being with us.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very kindly, Scott. I remain a fan.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from South Carolina Federal Credit Union. Owning a home is still possible if you ask the right people, like the home loan advisors at South Carolina Federal Credit Union. You could be closer to owning a home than you think with options like no money down and adjustable rate mortgages. Rely on South Carolina Federal for guidance through every step of the home loan process. Learn more at scfederal.org/homeloans. Qualifications and restrictions apply. Equal housing lender.
There's an interesting tension that comes up in this interview with Crystal Wilkinson. She is the writer of the book Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghosts, which is a cookbook and a memoir written as an appreciation to the women that came before her who worked to the bone in the kitchen. And Wilkinson says that as a feminist, she does believe that if women don't want to work in the kitchen preparing meals for the family, they shouldn't have to. But when her own daughters said as much, it elicited some complicated feelings there. Here's Wilkinson talking to Here and Now Celeste Headlee.
Crystal Wilkinson is a former Kentucky poet laureate. She teaches creative writing at the University of Kentucky, and she's been collecting and cooking recipes from 5 generations of her Black Appalachian family for decades. So it's not surprising that her latest book is not just a treasure trove of recipes and history, but also a beautifully written memoir. Crystal Wilkinson's book is called Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghosts, and she joins me now. Welcome.
Good to be here.
I was so glad that you started the book the way you did, by acknowledging that when most people think of the Appalachians, they do not think of African Americans. But your family has lived in Casey County, Kentucky since at least the early 1800s, right?
Right.
Can you tell us how your family ended up in Appalachia? How'd you get there?
Through slavery, I think quiet as it's kept, most people think of those plantations in the South, the Deep South, as being the bastion of slavery. But there was also slavery in small towns and in mountains. And usually the enslaved people in those smaller, more rural places worked right next to the owner sometimes. That's how my family got there. My 4th great-grandmother, Aggie of color, was born in 1795 in Virginia and brought to Kentucky as Kentucky was being formed in early 1800s.
One of the ways in which this book is such a gift is you have tracked the history of your family in a way that many African Americans are not able to. I mean, it is sometimes very difficult to get this kind of history here. How hard was it for you to track these things down?
It was extremely difficult, and it was also very emotional for me. The reason why I can track my 4th great-grandmother is primarily because she was in a relationship, a partnership. I guess we would call it a marriage now, although I don't think their union was legal, with a white man. So I was able to find records of him deeding her kitchen items, a feather bedstead, pots and pans, and tables. And then she was known as Aggie of color. And so what was fascinating about it is that I could find her as long as she was with him. So he deeded her some land, he deeded her those household items. She's listed on some census records, but once he dies, she sort of disappears again. And so it was difficult, but I also think that Grandma Aggie is sort of a stand-in for the thousands and thousands of Black women of her time who have not had a voice, and all those thousands of people who can't put their finger on something exact the way that I was able to find those court documents and other documents that say, she was there. I almost start crying now when I realized that I was able to put my finger even on the ink when I went to the courthouse.
Yeah, it's such a gift. I mean, when I track back that far, once I get past a couple generations, there are no names. It just, in the records, it just says slave. I mean, that's an incredible gift that you have given to your family.
Yeah, and that was one of the daunting things, like, Aggie's daughter. And this is another way that I was able to find her, is that her daughter, Patsy Rife, was a well-known Black businesswoman in her time. And in all of the history of my particular county in Kentucky, Patsy Rife is mentioned, but it always says that her mother was a slave and her father was a wealthy white business owner. And so it was really a real emotional day when I was saying, oh, this slave, Patsy Rife's mother, was Aggie of color, who became Aggie Wilkinson, who begat all of us.
So, I mean, one of the things that I loved about the recipes is they're so pragmatic. This isn't precious cooking. That doesn't mean it's not good. It just means it's very forgiving. It feels to me like even somebody who, doesn't cook all the time would probably be able to make most of these things. And it sounds from your writing like a lot of that came from the women in your family who were busy. Your grandmother, Christine, raised 7 kids while working her own farm. She also worked as a domestic, cooking for other people's families. And the recipes ended up being things that you didn't need to stand over the stove the whole time.
Right. You had children to take care of, you had animals to take care of. And so being able to put something on the stove and walk away and leave it for a little while was important. And I think the other thing is that many of our culture's comfort foods come from survival foods. When you don't have much, you can get a little starch, a little broth, and what little meat you have, and put it together, and you have chicken and dumplings.
Which is one of the recipes in the cookbook. There are some ingredients. I made 8 or 9 of the recipes out of the book. I got to say, the blackberry lemonade was a massive hit, as were the hoe cakes and the chili. But for the hoe cakes, I had to get self-rising cornmeal, which I don't think I've ever used before.
Yeah, that's what my grandmother always used. Like, she thought that self-rising anything was like a miracle invention. And she used self-rising flour and self-rising cornmeal.
I mean, it makes sense. They were working hard.
Right.
The idea of life in Appalachia being hard scrabble, the idea that life for African Americans is difficult, that's, I feel, a story most of us are used to. But your book also has so much joy. And you have this chapter that's called Birthdays Must Be Celebrated. And it feels to me as though people might be surprised by how much light and lightness and laughter there is included in your memories of growing up. How do you think that shaped not only you as a writer, but you as a cook?
Even when you look at something as devastating as our legacy of slavery, Aggie worked for people as an enslaved woman. My grandmother, Christine, worked for people as a domestic worker. And you had to find moments of joy. I mean, I think that cooking and providing food for people was a form of love, and that was a joy. But I think for Black people, for Black women, the kitchen has always been a place of joy, even though it is a place of toil. It's where we got our hair done. It's where you heard the gossip. It's where music was played and you danced. The light always shone a particular way in my grandmother's kitchen. And so there was lots and lots of joy in the cooking of food.
You also talk about passing on that kind of joy, that kind of tradition to your own kids. And I wondered how strong of an influence your children were to your decision to write this book. Obviously, you're sharing it with the wider public, which I'm grateful for. But what part did the thought of your children have in this?
I hope they see this book as a gift. There's so much about our history that they don't know. There's a part of me as an educator, as an intellectual person, as a feminist who says, well, no, you don't have to cook if you don't want to. But when my daughters said that they didn't want to cook those large meals, I have to admit that even as a feminist, it kind of hurt my feelings. So I hope that they'll read this book and they'll have sort of a change of heart, that they want to carry on some of these traditions. And I think it's important for them to know about their Black Appalachian foodways. Like me, they sort of take that part of their history for granted. So I hope that they embrace all of these things that were and build a foundation for their own future with their children. And I'll be there. I envision myself already as the future kitchen ghost telling them not too much salt, a little bit more sage. the ways in which I feel like my grandmother and the other kitchen ghosts guide me.
Crystal Wilkinson's book is Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghosts, Stories and Recipes from 5 Generations of Black Country Cooks. Crystal Wilkinson, thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this week on NPR's Book of the Day. If you want more, you can sign up for our newsletter at npr.org/newsletter/books. I'm Andrew Limbong. The podcast is produced by Isabella Gomez Sarmiento and edited by Megan Sullivan. Our founding editor is Petra Mayer. The show elements for this week were produced and edited by Emiko Tamagawa, Todd Munt, Karen Zamora, Catherine Fox, Rena Advani, Barry Gordimer, Melissa Gray, Gabe O'Connor, Dee Parvaz, and Ryan Bank. Beth Donovan is our managing editor. Thanks for listening.
This is a message from This Is History with Dan Jones. Let renowned historian Dan Jones guide you through a landscape of rivalry, treachery, and murder, bringing to life the epic struggles of Henry and Edward. Listen to This Is History, Season 4, now on your favorite podcast platform.
Support for NPR and the following message come from IXL Learning. IXL Learning uses advanced algorithms to give the right help to each kid, no matter the age or personality. Get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when you sign up today at IXL.com/NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Rosetta Stone, an expert in language learning for 30 years. Right now, NPR listeners can get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership to 25 different languages for 50% off. Learn more at rosettastone.com/NPR.